What I'm about to tell you was part of an internal incident report that never made it to the public. Officially, it's classified as a routine missing persons case. Unofficially, everyone who worked it knows that isn't true. I worked as a search and rescue coordinator for a state park in the western United States for almost 8 years. You don't take that job expecting peace and quiet. You deal with injuries, lost hikers, exposure cases, sometimes bodies. You learn to separate fear from fact until something happens that doesn't fit any category. This happened in early October. Off-season, fewer tourists, the kind of quiet that makes the forest feel larger than it should. At 9:12 a.m., we got a call about a missing hiker named Daniel Rowe, 34 years old, experienced, local. He'd entered the park the afternoon before and never checked out. That alone wasn't alarming. Plenty of people misjudge time, but his truck was still at the trailhead, locked, with his phone inside. That's when we mobilized. By 11 a.m., we were on the trail Daniel was last seen on. Weather was clear, no storm, no reason for confusion. About 3 miles in, we found his footprints clearly visible in the dirt. And then, they stopped. Not faded, not scattered. Stopped. No scuffle. No signs of falling. No broken brush. Just a clean trail that ended like someone erased him. One of the guys joked that maybe he'd learned to teleport. Nobody laughed. About 20 yards off the trail, we found his backpack leaning against a tree. Not dropped, not tossed, leaning, water bottle still half full, keys still inside, wallet untouched. That's when the unease set in. People don't abandon survival gear unless something forces them to. We expanded the search radius. Dogs were brought in. Every single one reacted the same way when we passed that spot. Whining, circling, refusing to go farther. One handler pulled me aside and said, "Something's wrong here." They're confused, not distracted. That night, we set up trail cameras and thermal sensors. Standard procedure. At 2:17 a.m., one camera triggered. It didn't catch movement. It caught stillness. A tall shape stood just inside the tree line. Too tall to be a person, too thin. No heat signature where a face should have been. The arms extended lower than human proportion, almost brushing the knees. It didn't move for 12 minutes. Then it was gone. No walking, no blur. One frame it was there, the next empty forest. We chalked it up to equipment error. That's what the report says. But things escalated. Over the next 3 days, hikers began reporting someone watching them. Always at a distance, always silent. When they tried to focus on it, they described a headache, pressure behind the eyes. One woman said her nose started bleeding when she tried to take a photo. The strangest part? They all described the same thing. Tall, faceless, standing between trees. One man swore he followed it for several minutes before realizing his phone said 4 hours had passed. He was found nearly 5 miles from where he started, with no memory of walking there. Then we found Daniel, or what was left of him. 5 days after he vanished, a volunteer spotted something off trail. Daniel was standing upright against a tree, not slumped, not decomposed, not injured in any visible way. Just standing. His eyes were open, dry, his face expressionless. No defensive wounds, no cause of death we could immediately identify. The medical examiner's report came back inconclusive. Time of death couldn't be determined. Body temperature didn't match the timeline. Official cause? Undetermined natural causes. Unofficially, the coroner told me something that still makes my stomach drop. He said, "It's like his body forgot how to be alive." The final incident happened the night before the case was quietly closed. I was reviewing footage alone in the ranger station. Around 3 a.m., one of the trail cams activated again. Same location, same angle. The figure was closer this time. It filled the frame. No face, no features, just smooth, pale nothing where eyes should be. Its head tilted slightly, like it was curious, like it knew I was watching. The screen glitched. Static filled the room. Every monitor shut off at once. When they came back on, the footage was gone. So was the file backup. 2 weeks later, I resigned. The park never acknowledged anything unusual. Daniel's death was ruled an accident. The trail reopened. Life moved on. All I can say is, you ever feel like you're being watched in the woods? Don't look for what's watching you. because some things don't follow you. They wait for you to notice them. A few summers ago, I went hiking alone in the Selkirk Mountains, one of the most remote and rugged sections I've ever explored. I've been a solo hiker for years, experienced in navigation and survival, so I wasn't worried. I packed for 3 days, checked my maps, my GPS, everything. The first day was normal: quiet forest, birds, the rustle of wind through pine needles. But by midday on the second day, I noticed the first signs something was off. At first it was subtle, the feeling of eyes on me, snapping twigs in the distance. Then I saw the footprints, small, narrow, human-shaped but oddly spaced, like whoever made them glided instead of walking. They appeared at intervals along the trail, always slightly off to the side, never directly in front of me, and then they vanished. I told myself it was other hikers, but there were none. The forest was empty, silent in a way that pressed against your chest. That night, I set up camp near a shallow creek. I tried to ignore the low murmurs drifting through the trees, soft chanting that didn't sound human. Every time I looked outside my small firelight, I thought I saw movement, shadows darting behind ferns, figures crouched just beyond the fire's reach. Sleep was fitful, interrupted by twigs snapping and leaves rustling unnaturally, like someone was pacing the perimeter. I kept my flashlight and knife close. The next morning I began hiking again, trying to stick to the trail but also watching constantly. That's when I saw them for the first time clearly. A small group, short and wiry, skin painted with dark stripes or mud, wearing garments made of bark and leaves. They crouched behind ferns and rocks, but their eyes followed me. They didn't make a sound, yet I felt every movement as if it pressed against my back. I tried not to panic, keeping my pace slow and steady. Over the next several hours, they stayed at the edge of my vision, appearing in clearings I had already passed, vanishing and reappearing with impossible timing. I realized then that they weren't just following me. They were herding me along certain paths. I tried to go off trail, backtrack, even hide behind thick trees, but every time I emerged, I found the same footprints again, spaced as if the forest itself was mapped for them. By late afternoon, I reached a fork in the trail and froze. Dozens of figures emerged from behind trees and boulders, moving in perfect coordination. They didn't advance toward me, but their numbers, the silence, and the unnatural stillness of their posture made my skin crawl. I kept moving, carefully, my heart hammering, until night fell. I set up camp on a ridge, far from the creek. That night the chanting started again, soft and hypnotic, coming from multiple directions. I could feel it vibrating through the ground and into my chest. I barely slept. When I woke, there was a small object beside my backpack, a carved figurine, maybe 6 inches tall, crude, shaped like a human, painted with the same stripes I had seen on the people. I didn't touch it, just stared at it for a long time before walking on. The following day, I finally emerged from the dense forest to a main trail. As I looked back, I saw dozens of them standing perfectly still at the tree line. They didn't move, didn't shout, didn't chase. They just waited, watching silently as I left. I've never returned, and I doubt I ever will. Even now, months later, I feel it sometimes. A presence lingering at the edge of my vision, a weight pressing down, reminding me of those woods. I catch myself thinking about their coordination, the way the forest seemed to bend around them, the way they could disappear and reappear without a sound. I don't know who they were, or why they were there, or how long they've been operating in that forest, but I know one thing. Once they notice you, you carry them with you. Even in the city, I feel watched, even when I'm not in the woods. The memory has become a part of me. I've tried to tell people, but most call it imagination, paranoia, a story to scare yourself. But I know what I saw. I still don't know if I believe it myself, but I saw it with my own eyes. A few years ago, I worked as a seasonal ranger in the Northern Rockies, mostly monitoring wildlife and maintaining trails in the high wilderness. One summer, I was assigned to Crow's Nest Forest, a section so remote that maps barely marked it. Locals warned me to avoid it after dark. They said the woods were watched. At first, I laughed it off. Dense forest, wind through the trees, shadow tricks. Easy to spook yourself. But then the signs started. On the first day, I found a small campsite deep in the forest. Not unusual except for the items left behind. Several burned out candles, small animal bones arranged in circles, and a journal with pages filled with symbols that made no sense. I took photos and left the area alone. That night, while checking another trail, I heard voices, low, chanting voices, moving softly through the trees. I assumed hikers, but there were no paths leading that way, and the voices didn't sound human, uneven, whispered, almost as if multiple people were speaking in unison, but out of sync. Over the next week, I discovered more signs. Trees marked with crude carvings, feathered charms tied to branches, footprints that didn't match human proportions. One evening, a hiker came into the ranger station. He said he had been walking alone near the creek when he saw a group of people in dark cloaks moving silently between the trees. He swore they weren't just wearing robes. Their movements were unnaturally slow and deliberate, almost mechanical. They formed a circle around something on the forest floor. He wouldn't say what it was, just that he felt drawn toward it and had to force himself to leave. I didn't want to believe him until I saw it myself. One night I was checking trail cameras. A flash triggered one at 11:38 p.m. The footage showed four figures in long black cloaks standing in a clearing, surrounding a small mound covered in leaves. They didn't move much, but their heads were tilted in ways that didn't look natural. After a few seconds, one stepped backward, paused, and the camera cut out. When I checked the memory cards, several hours of footage were missing. The next day, hikers started reporting strange experiences. One woman claimed she had felt watched for hours while walking the forest, even though no one was around. Another said she had woken up mid-hike with her bag unzipped and a feather in her hand she didn't recognize. One man reported seeing a figure disappear behind a tree, only to reappear a few hundred yards away moments later. I started following the trails at night myself. Around midnight, I entered a clearing I had never noticed during the day. The air was thick, cold, and smelled faintly of smoke and wet earth. That's when I saw them. 5 cloaked figures, standing silently in a circle, facing inward. They had torches, but the light didn't illuminate them fully. It was like the flames shied away from their forms. I froze and one turned toward me. I couldn't see a face, only a void beneath the hood. My instincts screamed to run, but my feet felt heavy, and I stood there, silently for at least 4 hours and terrified to move before they walked off into the woods. I left the forest at first light. I didn't report what I saw because who would believe it? Over the following months, locals whispered about missing hikers and strange rituals. Some claimed that the cult had been operating in those woods for decades, isolated and patient, appearing only to mark territory or initiate someone new. I don't know what they were doing or who they were, but I know the woods are different in that section. Silent, patient, watching. I quit my post shortly after and haven't returned. Sometimes I dream about the cloaked figures. Sometimes I wake to the faint smell of smoke or feel a presence in the corner of the room, and I remember the void beneath the hood. I struggle to explain this without sounding paranoid, but what I experienced in those woods felt deliberate, intelligent, and patient. A few years ago, I went on a solo hike in a remote stretch of forest in the Pacific Northwest. I chose it specifically because it was quiet and rarely visited. I had done dozens of solo hikes before and never had a problem. The trailhead was empty when I arrived, and there were no fresh tire tracks or signs of recent activity. The first few hours were normal. The forest was dense, damp, and quiet in the way old forests usually are. Around midday, I noticed the silence felt heavier. The birds stopped calling, and the wind seemed muted, like the trees were absorbing sound. I remember feeling watched, but I ignored it. That feeling happens sometimes when you're alone in the woods too long. About an hour later, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, not heavy enough to be an animal. I stopped and listened. The sound stopped too. I waited, scanned the trail, and saw nothing. When I started walking again, the footsteps returned, always staying a short distance behind me. This went on for nearly 20 minutes. Whenever I stopped, it stopped. Whenever I moved, it followed. I never heard breathing or saw movement, just the sound of someone matching my pace. I told myself that, though it was rare, it was likely just another hiker keeping distance. But the trail was too narrow, and I never caught a glimpse of anyone ahead or behind. As the day went on, I began seeing movement off the trail, shapes slipping behind trees, branches shifting where there was no wind. Once I clearly saw a silhouette step behind a trunk just as I turned my head. It wasn't tall, and it didn't move like an animal. My chest tightened, and I felt the first real surge of fear. I decided to turn around and head back, but when I did, the footsteps sped up. Not running, just faster, closer. Panic set in, but I forced myself to stay calm and keep walking. I didn't want to show fear. That night, I set up camp earlier than planned, hoping darkness would make whatever was following me back off. It didn't. As soon as night fell, I heard movement circling my campsite. Slow pacing, crunching leaves, the occasional snap of a twig. It stayed just beyond the firelight. I never heard a voice, never saw eyes, but I could feel attention fixed on me. At one point, something brushed the side of my tent. I froze, barely breathing. It lingered there for several seconds, then moved away. I didn't sleep. At first light, I packed up and left immediately. The feeling of being followed never stopped. Sometimes the footsteps were behind me, sometimes to the side, sometimes ahead, as if whatever it was knew the terrain better than I did. Once I found fresh footprints in the mud that weren't mine. They were human-shaped but oddly narrow, with toes that seemed longer than normal. They disappeared abruptly, as if the person had stepped off the ground. When I finally reached the edge of the forest and saw the road, the footsteps stopped. The pressure lifted instantly, like a weight removed from my chest. I turned around one last time and saw nothing, just trees standing silently. No movement, no sound. I left without looking back again. I never reported it. Because what is there to report? I don't know what was following me through the forest that day, but I know for sure I wasn't alone. I was being stalked. Even now, years later, I avoid hiking alone. Sometimes when I'm walking in quiet places, I get the same feeling. That subtle awareness of something keeping pace just out of sight. I work as a wildlife tracker and occasional search and rescue in the Appalachian foothills, and most days are routine, counting deer, checking trail cameras, fixing fences. But one spring, I was assigned to a stretch of forest locals called Black Hollow. Nobody goes there after dusk. Hunters, hikers, even longtime rangers avoid it. At first, I thought it was superstition, dense woods, uneven terrain, easy to get lost. But the longer I worked there, the more I realized something was off. The first time it happened, I was hiking a trail I'd taken dozens of times. The sun was low, shadows stretching long and strange. I heard something move, not a branch snapping or a deer fleeing, but deliberate, careful. I froze, sweeping my flashlight across the trees. Nothing, just a patch of fog or mist, or maybe just my imagination. I shrugged it off. Everyone hears things in the woods, but it didn't stop. Over the next few days, the feeling grew. Trail cameras I checked the next morning started capturing strange images. Shapes, pale and thin, standing motionless between the trees, sometimes barely visible, sometimes blocking the lens. Not animals, not people I recognized. And sometimes the cameras recorded hours of nothing, then a single frame showing the figure, tall, unnaturally thin, no visible face, just standing there, watching. Then hikers began reporting it. At first they laughed it off. Then the stories grew stranger. One elderly man said he was walking the hollow in the morning and saw a figure 8 feet tall, arms hanging unnaturally low, standing still just off the trail. He swore it was watching him, unmoving, and when he blinked, it vanished. Another woman said it followed her along the path for almost 10 minutes, staying just at the edge of her vision. Whenever she turned to look directly, it was gone. But she could feel it, weightless and patient, watching. I started noticing things about the trail. Footprints didn't always make sense. Some were too long, too straight, or ended abruptly in thick brush, like the person had vanished mid-step. Things left behind in the woods added to the strangeness. Water bottles, packs, sometimes clothes, placed neatly against trees. No sign of struggle. One night I stayed late to check cameras. Around midnight, I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing. But the air felt heavier, like someone had entered a space I couldn't see. I stepped closer to a clearing, and my light caught it. The pale figure just at the edge of the tree line. No face, limbs too long, standing perfectly still. I blinked. Gone. My flashlight sweep found nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the ranger station, doors locked, lights on. At 3 a.m., a knock on the window. Deliberate, slow. No sound. Just the tap and the shadow of the figure against the glass. Then it vanished. The next day, hikers and campers began reporting missing items, oddly placed in the woods. Some said their gear disappeared for hours, only to be found in completely different locations. One hiker swore he had followed the figure for several minutes and lost track of time entirely. He emerged 5 miles from where he started, unsure how he got there. Days later, a search party found Daniel, a missing hiker, standing upright against a tree in a remote part of Black Hollow. No injuries, no decomposition, no visible cause of death. Eyes open, blank stare, body stiff, as if frozen mid-step. The medical examiner's report was inconclusive. Officially, the cause of death was undetermined natural causes. Over the next month, more hikers reported the same figure. Always tall, faceless, arms too long, always between the trees, always watching silently. Some even reported hearing whispers, low and indistinct, in the wind, words that seemed to come from nowhere. Electronics failed near the area. Phones died, cameras glitched, GPS units malfunctioned. One person even reported a strange, static-filled recording on their voice memo, capturing a sound like breathing that didn't belong to any human. I stopped going there alone. I haven't gone back in years, but I still hear stories, hikers disappearing, gear misplaced, shadowy figures in Black Hollow. Sometimes I think about that night, the shadow at the window, the deliberate knock. And I know one thing. Whatever is out there, it doesn't move like a human. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more content like this.